All right, welcome everyone to directory webinar number 22. Today we are going to be talking about email deliverability, SPK, DKIM, DMARC, oh my. A lot of acronyms there, a lot of complex email deliverability topics for today. You can see from my icon there, I've grabbed my cup of coffee. I suggest you do the same as well. There's a lot of technical stuff in this one. I'm not gonna lie, but I think it's a lot of topics that a lot of people keep asking about in the forums. Just about their business and their email deliverability, why things are going to spam, and hopefully I can enlighten you on the status of what these things are, where they came from, and how you can do that to potentially set up your directory for success and maybe improve it a little bit, or just for any other website really that you need. If you do not have a directory, if you just have a normal WordPress site, anything else, this will probably help you guys out. Just as a reminder, we have been continuing on the onboarding series here on Directory Toolkit and directorywebinar.com. These are some of the things that we have kind of talked about what onboarding can do for you in terms of enhancing your clients' onboarding process and what you're providing to them. They can provide tours, welcome messages, pop-up messages, banners, warnings, notifications, contextual messages. And we talked last week about email marketing and how you can use a drip email marketing campaign to onboard your people. And obviously, in order to get those email campaigns out to them, you need to be able to deliver it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. But if you did miss any of the other onboarding stuff that we've been talking about, please go back and look at the previous webinars. There's a lot of good content in there as well. So these are some of the things that we've been going over. We went over tours, training, tutorials before, and next week we're going to get into tool tips and pop-ups. But this week, or last week, we talked about drip emails. We're going to continue on the email trail today by talking about email settings. Now, I'm going to do a little bit of overview here first, and then we'll deep dive into each one of these specifically. So when we're talking about these acronyms here, deliverability of email, we're talking identity verification protocols. Now, it's a big word, but basically it means like, how do you know you're getting what you're supposed to be getting, and you're getting it from who you think you're getting it from? That's basically what it is. And so back in the day, back when we originally sent out emails, all you really had was the from. It was something visible, right? You see it is from support@whatever.com, and you kind of assumed that that's who it came from. And even back in the early days of the internet, when emails started to be sent out, you could just easily change your settings in the background of who you wanted it to send from, and it literally just showed up in the from address of whoever you're sending it from, and you could basically spoof that really easy, and there were really no standards. So that was all that was ever there. Then they came up with all these other terms here, and I'm just going to briefly go over them. And again, don't worry about, we're going to deep dive in each one of these a little bit later. But the first one that came out is SPF, and basically allows senders to tell the ISPs which IPs are able to send on their behalf. So what that basically does is it checks the return path field, not the visible from address, so the reply to address. And checks to make sure that whoever sent that email is allowed to send from your support@whatever.com. And so what it basically does is it checks your DNS settings to make sure that that IP address that it was sent from is authorized in your DNS settings. Since you own the domain, you can put what IP addresses can send from, and it basically just verifies that and it checks and passes that, right? So that's SPF. The next thing that came up with is DKIM, and basically that answers two questions. Does the email have a valid signature, and which domain signed it? And so it doesn't tell anybody on what to do with the message, or to say if it fails or passes a verification, and it's hidden and is missing a way to verify where the message is coming from. So what it basically does is it compares that certificate from the sender, and then you have the other half of that certificate at the DNS settings again, and it basically compares those two halves of the signature, kind of like it does for an SSL certification, and basically says, yep, those two match. That is it's coming from that person. But again, it says it's coming from that authorized server, but it doesn't really say that the address and the from address is really correct. And then they came up with the DMARC, and basically that was the newest one. It basically authenticates the sender against the from field, the part that's been missing through those other standards for what the field that user sees. So it basically prevents phishers from using a bogus domain in the from address while signing the message with an unrelated domain that they control in the background. Because remember, DKIM is in the background, it's hidden. And so you could actually technically be allowed to send from an IP address, have a valid certificate, but actually have a different from address that you are not authorized to use, because everything else could be validated in the back end, and you see something totally different on the front end. So DMARC was trying to prevent that. So that's a broad brushstroke overview of what those three are. And we'll get into that a little bit on what your systems do in terms of marking things as spam or pass or fail or all that stuff. We'll get to that in a little bit. So that's the broad overview. So let's zoom out here. I guess looking at an email as an example, just to kind of show you where everything's at. So when you have a from address, we'll just go down that second block there. The visible header, you see a from and a to. It's going to you. It's going to Mary. It's coming from John. Right? That's the visible header. That's the only thing you ever see. Everything else is kind of normally hidden. The SMTP envelope is what they call is hidden. It has the return path, and in this case, on the left, it is from John at example.com. It's from him. It's a return path. The reply to address is John, but the one on the right is not. The return path is hacker, right, at badactor.com, and you can't tell that normally unless you hit reply. And basically why that's important is because obviously if it's from hacker at badactor.com, you should be able to recognize that when you hit reply and see that you're not replying to the person who sent it to you. But sometimes people don't look, and that's how they get hacked or get information, is because they send it from John, but it's really when you reply back with your credit card information, it's going to the hacker. And so that is the problem. And so that's what we're basically trying to prevent. But remember that SPF validates the sender against the IP address. It doesn't actually, that's just checking the IP address of that bad actor. So they could be authorized to send email from a badactor.com because badactor.com owns the domain badactor.com. And he can send it from there. It's just checking the return path because he is authorized as an IP address to send that. But it looks like it's coming from John, and he's basically spoofing that email. So that's that side of the SPF. The SPF is just checking the return path. And then there's another hidden header in there called the DKIM signature, and those are where all those are sitting. You don't see that either. It's in the background of your actual message traffic. It's kind of hidden. It's kind of like a HTML code that you don't see on the website. It's all the stuff in the background that's there, but you don't really see it. And so that DKIM sender, again, on the left is coming from example.com, but the one on the right is as well. But that could very well be coming from badactor.com as well. And all that's doing is checking that, that half of the certificate, maybe on badactor.com, is the one that sent it. So that could be bad as well. And so you have a situation where you could have it still show from John, but have a return path to someone else and be signed with a DKIM signature from somebody else as well. So that's where DMARC came in, where it does that final layer of validating the John at example.com. So hopefully this gives you a little visual of where everything's kind of stored or what it's looking at. SPF is looking at the envelope, the return path. DKIM signature is the hidden header, and then DMARC is actually going to check the from. So those three aspects of an email. So why do we need to authenticate? I guess this is a broad brush overview. We already talked about this a little bit, but as email grew, bad actors found that they could exploit those recipients, right, by sending malicious messages, spoofing domains, and basically sending spam. So they could act as if they're sending on behalf of a trusted brand or sender, and then try to get them to respond again to that reply to email that's somebody else and provide personal sensitive information. And this happens all the time to people, and then other senders basically use that email as a way to send unwanted messages, and that actually culminated in the Can-Spam Act as well, to try to prevent some of that stuff. But again, usually that helps out more the people that actually want to follow the law as opposed to people that don't. So everybody still has problems with that. Spam is a problem, and that's why all the big companies that you're with, Gmail, Yahoo, etc., or whatever you're using, try to block that, because that's their reputation in terms of email deliverability and what they provide to you and the filtering that they provide to make it a better user experience for you. Because of all those bad actors and because of all those spammers, they put those in there to try to filter it out. But unfortunately, it filters some of your items as well. So what you can tell is that the email authentications like the SPF, DKIM, and DMARC were developed in order to stop that. All right, and so that's what we're going to talk about today. So the identity verification profiles, we already talked about the visible, and then they went into the other three. So we kind of went over that, and we're going to go each one step by step here. So the SPF. The SPF basically is called the Sender Policy Framework, SPF. Now, that's the oldest method. That's the one that first came out. And the purpose is to verify the authorized sending IP addresses. So here's the general process. I kind of went over it before, but I'll go over it again. An email authentication standard was developed by AOL, so you know it's old, right? It compares that email sender's actual IP address to a list of IP addresses authorized to send mail from that domain. And so here's the procedure in order to execute that. There's basically an SPF publication, so a domain owner, you as the domain owner at the DNS, at your cPanel, in your backend, your BD system, would publish an SPF record to that DNS that spells out the rule sets for their domain. So it's basically a plain text record, a TXT record that you put in your DNS, and it can be as simple as a single line that lists a bunch of IP addresses that are allowed to send email on your behalf. What it does then, and it looks up, when you get an email, it looks up the return path SPF lookup, and when it receives that email, it performs a DNS lookup to your IP address. So it looks at that, you're getting it from whatever.com. It's going to go to whatever.com and look up your DNS and retrieve that SPF record, that text record for a domain, and see if that domain shown in the message's return path, remember return path, not the from, make sure that domain in the return path is a valid IP address in your SPF record. If there's an IP match, it will process that SPF record to attempt to find that in that record. And then it does a pass or fail determination off that. If there's a match, it passes the test, and in most cases delivered to your inbox. If there is no match, and the receiving server basically treats it like a failed verification, and then it will reject the message or flag it as suspicious and then go to your spam folder. So what happens though now is if you're sending your whatever.com from your BD site, from any of these other third-party tools or anything where you're just like, I'm sending it from support at whatever.com, that wherever that server is coming from, whatever the IP address of that sender is, needs to be in your SPF records in order to pass this. And so if you don't know what the IP address is, or if they don't provide it to you, you need to find out either include their sending IPs or their SPF records or whatever. And we'll talk about the includes in a minute. But you need to add that to your own text record in your BD DNS settings in order to whitelist those. If that is not, that's probably why a lot of your emails from some other services are going to spam. And so we'll clarify on how to do that in a little bit. So that's the pass or fail, the process for SPF. So like I mentioned includes just a second ago. So here's what that is. It's basically a list of permitted IP address or net blocks or like ranges. So instead of just going, 1234.1234.1234 and then putting another IP and another IP, it's basically saying, hey, include their entire SPF portfolio that's on their domain settings, include all of those. So when you that would be like somebody else, if you had like 2 IP addresses that are cleared on your domain, if somebody included your SPF record, all 2 of the IP addresses that are in yours are also in theirs. So it kind of piggybacks, I guess, is what it is. If the MX record or A record for the sending server contains specific IP addresses, then let that message pass, is basically what it's saying. Like, go check theirs as well. And then if it's in there too, go ahead and whitelist it and then pass it. Don't fail. So it basically it references the rules controlled by other entities. So Gmail is a good example. So if you want to enable an SPF for a mail sent by Google, Google Docs, Google Calendar, basically everybody that sends in your behalf, and you're using their G Suite, you would actually use that include statement you see in quotes there. Include _SPF.google.com, and you would add that to your SPF record, which you see at the bottom. And so here's an example of one that you would normally find in your DNS settings at Brilliant Directories. And they've already done this for you, and I'll get to that in a second as well. But this is an exact copy of one that just comes straight out of the Brilliant Directories one, other than the Google part, because if they don't know whether you're using Google or what you're using for your email, it'll have the SendGrid in there automatically, the include SendGrid, but you may need to add that include spf.google.com. So that's kind of your first task. that if you are using Google or Gmail or some of these other services, go add that include, that one I did right in front of the other include for SendGrid in your SPF record in there. And I'll show you where that's at here in a little bit, but that's basically what you want to add in there. So that is an authorized IP sender. So let's go visual for the visual people in the room. This is what an SPF record looks like. You have the sending email service on the bottom left. It sends an email. It goes to you, the recipient. It then checks up to the top here, that SPF record, if that is an authorized for sending the domain. It's going to look up the sending organization's DNS server, i.e. theoretically yours, right? Because you're the one that was sending the email, or you know, your BD directory, and it's going to look for that published SPF record. And when it comes back and it verifies that that IP address is whitelisted or not whitelisted, it's going to do one of those two things. It's going to fail the policy in red there and rejects it because it's marked as spam, because it does not have a cleared IP address, or it's going to pass on the valid email and it's going to go to your inbox or your client's inbox. So that's kind of the process. You get an email, it checks the SPF records for a cleared IP address and then passes or rejects it. So here's a couple of SPF tips on there. You are only allowed to have one record for one domain. So this is explicitly defined in there's standards for everything, right? It's legal in the process. So it's RFC 4408. A domain name must not have multiple records that would cause an authorization check to select more than one record. So that means that as a rule of thumb, multiple SPF records will fail the SPF authentication. So even if you have a valid IP address and an include in there that would normally pass, if you have another SPF record on your DNS that looks fishy to the system or the software or the standards, right? And it's going to reject it anyway. So here's an example of another BD owner that I had to help them with. They had SPF records in there twice. You see, they have an include for Outlook because they are using Outlook. And so that was added in there by somebody, or them, or whoever. And then they have the generic one that was in there done by BD. And so BD's was in there probably first, or maybe it was the other way around because I think they added it in there. But go check your DNS settings for your text records. If you have two V equals SPFs in there, you need to add them into one another. So all you basically need to do is, if you had this example, you would take the include SPF protectionoutlook.com, just remove that middle part. You already have the SPF one and the all. On the other one, just go ahead and grab that include and just put it in front of or after the SendGrid.not with a space in between it, and resave that one, and then obviously delete the extraneous one, and then that will get it back into one record. So that is the second task that you need to go do, is go check that you have stuff in your SPF. But if you have two SPFs, you're going to want to remove and consolidate. And the final tip is that it includes must have to have your IP or they will fail validation. So here's one that I've had issues with before on the SendGrid piece, is that the SendGrid, I guess, IP address that they were sending it from, that's highlighted in yellow there, was not in the SPF record of the SendGrid. And so the problem was, I'm including their, include SendGrid.net all, but that IP address that they were sending on for that day or that server was not in there. So I had to actually kind of ask the question of what 168.245, where's that one? It's got 168.245.00 down there, but the 92.0 is not in there. And so one of my emails got blocked because I did not have that domain was not in theirs. And unfortunately, that's outside of your control. And, you have to go over to SendGrid. Now, this is one reason maybe why you want to upgrade to a paid SendGrid and add that paid SendGrid to your directories, because you can then have your own IP address. You can control and add that one IP address to your SPF includes, and now you're in control. It's your IP address. You added it in there. It's not going to ever get blocked because it's not going to change based on whatever SendGrid serving out of the shared server that day. It's your IP address. It's in there. It's going to get green listed every single time. So keep that in mind as you're thinking about using the paid SendGrid. So here's some limitations of the SPF. On those shared IPs, we kind of talked about that a second ago. If those IP addresses identifies a service that you authorize, such as MailChimp or whatever, then anyone using that same IP address on the system could potentially send messages that authorize with your SPF record. Does that make sense? It's a cleared IP address. So if I know who else is on my IP address, I can just send emails all day long or get a reply back from them in the reply address and get back the email responses looking like it's coming from yours, and it's going to pass the SPF. So, so if they know that's just a risk, a limitation, then it's not foolproof, and that's why they added those other things. But the way that works opens it up for that kind of spoofing or spamming, and that does happen as well. There's also an SPF 10 DNS lookup limit, so that's why you always want to use G Suites. If you use include spf.google.com, it actually comprises 4 different lookups, because the SPF record at spf.google.com actually contains 3 more lookups of its own, so they're additive. So if you had a train of 10 lookups, like every lookup include you also had an include, and it trailed out 10 things deep or whatever, there's your DNS lookup limit right there, and it won't even get past that first one, or have whitelist or whatever, because it kind of uses up all 10 of those. And it's just again an inherent limitation of the system. And frankly, this is getting worse and worse as people are using more and more services or whatever. If you add a bunch of includes on there, you're gonna bust that pretty fast. IP addresses changes. We talked about that with SendGrid a little bit. Fluctuations in those IP addresses are going to require constant updates to the SPF record to prevent good email from being blocked. That's why you normally would use includes, right? Because if Google changes any of their stuff, you're covered, right? Because you have the include, include them all. And you don't have to worry about that. But if you're doing individual IP addresses and somebody changes that IP address or whatever that they're sending it from, like you're telling them, hey, what's your IP address you're sending it from? And then they change it. You got to change your SPF at the same time, because you're delineating exactly what IP address is. When it changes, that SPF record is no good anymore. It's going to cause a fail. So you're going to have to update that. So that becomes an issue. And then the final one is SPF doesn't survive email forwarding. So any SPF that you get from senders trying to reach you through a forwarding address will not validate, because the receiving server, it looks like the message is coming from that forwarding person, and the forwarding server, not yours. So, that's why you got to be careful about forwarding emails too. You always want to send that stuff, or if you're going to send out information to your clients, you want to just grab the content and initially send it. Sometimes the forwarding piece may mess that up as well. So just keep that in consideration. All right, the second one, DKIM, that stands for Domain Keys Identified Mail, DKIM. And the purpose, as we said before, is to verify that the email is coming from the domain that the key is associated with. So the process with that, again, those 2 halves, it has an authentication standard using to prevent it by allowing a receiver to check if that message was authorized and sent from the sender responsible for the domain. So the procedure for this, again, is 4 steps. They have you add a public key added to the DNS. So you, as the domain owner, or whoever's sending the actual email, would create a cryptographic public and private key pair, right? So those 2 halves, hash-coded, encrypted, not hash-coded, just encrypted halves, and you place that public key formatted as a text record. Again, it's a DNS text record in your DNS record. So this one also is automatically put in there by Brilliant Directories into the DNS. It has the public half of the SendGrid key that is added automatically for you guys. And that text record will contain that public key, and it's used by the receiving mail servers to verify that the message signature against the private key sent from the sender. So SendGrid has the private key, and they have that because they're sending the actual emails. So that private key is then put into that hidden email header that we showed you before. It's hidden, it's there, but you can't see it. And each time that email user is on the domain sends a message, a hash is generated based on the contents of the message. So that is interesting, because what that basically does is it has that private part is based on what's actually in the message, and so you can use that when it's basically a code, right? Like you would see, you know, in World War II, right? They encrypt the message, but you can use the public key on the other side to kind of you know, compare against that. But it's also because it's generated based on the contents of the message. You can then tell when it gets to the message. The other part is verifying is that it didn't change, because the key is based on what it was sent out as. If you change parts of the message, that hash generation based on that private key will change, and it's not going to validate with the other half, because they'll know something changed, which is kind of cool. So it not only says that it's verified, but also says it hasn't changed. So that's how you know it's valid, not only from the sender, but the content itself is valid, because that hash code generation was based on the actual content of the message. So the third part is the private public key match. And so that basically, the receiving email server now recomputes the hash based on the contents of the email message, and then it signs the public key with that's hosted on your DNS. And then based on that, the fourth part is it passes or fails that. If that hash value of the receiving server calculates a match with the encrypted hash in the email header, then it passes that authentication. So again, two halves making a whole, compares it, knows it's you know, that's the sender in the keys are authorized in the public key. But remember, that does not mean that where it says from somebody, that just means that it was sent, and there's something in your DNS records that validate that, right, for that domain, that sending domain. But again, you can't see where the sending domain may be spoofed. So but again, it's that next step to know that the message hasn't changed, and that there's, again, something in the server to validate that it came from you, a particular person. So here's an example of that all the stuff that's in the header that you don't see. Right down here at the bottom is an example DKIM signature. Now there's a bunch of different parts to this. You can look down below there, but D is basically the domain that it's coming from. So this one and this is coming from gmail.com. S is the selector that the mail servers will use to find the appropriate key, so it's just a selector code. H is the list of headers covered by the signature, so it covers the content, the subject, and the message ID. Again, just stuff in the background that's using to do the validation. BH there is the signature covering those headers, so that's the signature, right? The little hash code key that we talked about based on the content. And then B is the digital signature for the actual message body. So that's the thing that it's going to unhash or uncode with the other half of the key in order to see that it validates. So that's all the different parts. There's a couple other ones too. Here's a little deeper example. I'm not going to go into this one. You guys can pause the video later if you really care. There are some expire times in some of these as well. So depending on whether you're your sender has a timestamp, you may have to swap out the DKIM signatures as well, because when they publish a new non-expired DKIM, you got to swap those out. And I think BD does that automatically for us. I think with SendGrid, they've done push those out recently on that stuff. So I think they automatically change. But again, just keep in mind, if you're doing this on your own and adding additional ones, you may have to change these out as well. And then here's again just that the written out thing from that previous example on the previous page, just kind of compressed together there so you can see it, of the signing domain, the version, the signing algorithm, the signature timestamp, the expire timestamp. You can kind of go back and forth on that screen there, just kind of see where those are at. Again, most of this you don't really care about. Again, it's hidden. You just want to know what the DKIM does. And this is normally going to be provided for you by that entity, but this kind of gives you be able to look at that, some stuff like the expire time. That's important. If you have one of those, you can kind of look at that. So here's a visual of the DKIM record for the visual learners. Again, we got the sending mail server at the top with that private key coming from the message. It sends that DKIM DKIM signed email with the private key in it. It then goes in with that included header, and you receive the email at the email server. It then extracts that signature from the email header with the D and the S and all that stuff we just talked about, and extracts that. And then it fetches that DKIM record at your domain. So now that it's extracted that, it then goes to and pulls the other public half of the key from your DNS entry. And then it does a comparison. And so it says, hey, was the message unchanged? And if it was, if the keys match, then it passes. If it looks like it's changed, if the sender has changed, if the content has changed, if anything has been intercepted, and like if they grab that email, with the header and change it or push anything out, it's going to fail because something was changed. So it provides that unchanged sent thing, and that'll be a pass or fail. So that's the DKIM record. So here's a couple tips as well for DKIM. So a single domain can have many selectors. Each one of them for a different sender. So this allows for many different services to send on the behalf of the domain without all needing to share the same private key. Because remember, these are both keys that have two halves, and so everybody sending that will have their own key. So unlike the SPF, you can actually have multiple DKIMs within your DNS record. So that is actually recommended and totally okay. You could have 10 or however many you want DKIM signatures, and it looks like that. If you see this in your DNS records, it'll say blank dot underscore domain key at your .yourdomain.com. And so the other tip is that needs to be the last thing added to the message before it's sent. Now, again, you don't have to worry about this. It's normally the sender doing this. But if for some reason the company does it wrong, or if there's a signature, a blank space, or another header, or anything after that, it is going to fail. So this could potentially happen where the system sending is just doing it wrong. Like it's in the wrong spot. And if it does that, it's going to fail, and it's nothing you did. It's just a fact. It needs to be the last thing it extracts. I think we went over some of the other portions there where it says which pieces were covered, like the message or the header or whatever. Just in the specifications, the header and the body can both be signed, and Gmail recommends that you sign both. Again, normally not something that you're making the call on, but there may be some differences in how those different companies do that, of signing both of them, and if more signing is better, because again, depending on who's getting it or which one's validated, it may kick some things that if it doesn't think the body or the header's been signed, that particular spam practices may block it. And again, that's why this is so hard. There's so many different senders, so many different receivers. You can't control all of it. The best you think you can do is try to improve it as much as you can. And the final thing, by signing all your domains with the DKIM using the D equals, you are telling basically those ISPs to block any domain that is not on that hit list. So be sure to sign all the domains from which you send your promotional and transactional emails, because if you're not, then it's not going to pass that aspect. So we've talked about that before. You want to have one for G Suite. You want to have one from SendGrid. You want to have one from other services that are sending out your email. And then, if that's a distinguishing factor, that some people provide DKIM authorization and some don't. I mean, that may be the difference between you getting sales and not, right? Because that deliverability is going to be key. So if you're using some other service that you think that's going to be a factor, make sure that you include that in your decision factor matrix. So here's an example down here at the bottom of several domains. These are ones you can have subdomain .yourdomain. If that's your CNAME, and then you have two example domain keys, S1 and S2. These could be totally different services, totally different things, but each one has their own DKIM statement, and that's what it looks like when it's in your server. Again, BD already does this for you, and we'll look at that in just a second. So limitations of DKIM as well. You can have a mismatched signature, and so we already talked about this, where it doesn't actually stop the from address from being incorrect. So a phishing message can actually contain a perfectly valid DKIM signature that comes from a completely different domain than showed on the from field, and that would pass, right? The second limitation is the key security. If they acquire your domain private key, they could start signing messages as that domain, and it would pass a DKIM validation perfectly. So you want to make sure, obviously, it's a private key, right? Make sure that's not posted anywhere, and it just literally goes straight into your your DNS entry and then goes nowhere else, because obviously that's nobody's going to be fishing around for your key, but Google, if you got somebody was able to get that one, obviously that would not be good. So you're probably safe. People are probably not trying to figure out your DKIM signature, but just throwing it out there that it's private, right? Keep it that way. The other thing, there's no connection. They don't require any kind of connection to the mail servers controlled by the domain owner. So it doesn't really have to do anything. It's just where the domain's at. The mail servers could be somewhere else and sent by somebody else. So there's really no connection to the actual sending stuff. So that's why they can acquire your domain and then spoof it, because they can just put that stuff on their own DNS and pass, right? So there's no mail server connection there. Maybe they'll come up with that in the future, because obviously that would be a good enhancement, but it's not in there right now. And then the other one is the currency, right? So we talked about that. If there's if they rotate them regularly, or if your sender changes their private key, you also need to change your public key to match at the same time. Otherwise, they're not going to mesh up. So just keep that in mind as well. So here's what the setup looks like. Here's an example from another site, Change to Protect the Innocent. It just says, that whatever _ domain key at your domain, and then it's just a big long hash code. That's the private half, and it just has starts with V equals DKIM1. It's RSA encrypted with the K equals RSA, and then the P is just that private key. And there it is. You would add that, get that from the sender. This is an example edited version from actually Brilliant Directories that they automatically add in there for SendGrid for you, and that's the private key. It just sits in your DNS records, and it goes and grabs that when it gets sent from your SendGrid account. So again, this is already set up for you in Brilliant Directories. So the other part of the this thing, pass or fail or whatever, is called DKIM Alignment. And so when a message is aligned, basically that end user knows who really sent the message. So the SPF and DKIM that we talked about are only authentication mechanisms, right? They only authenticate either the return sender or the actual domain sending it. Passing that only means that the receiving organization can identify the real sending domain, but not the from address, right? And so again, just to reiterate for a third time, it's possible to get a message to pass both SPF and DKIM authentication, but still trick the end user into thinking it came from someone else by spoofing it from the from address. So the DKIM alignment basically was the next step to say, okay, now that we know where it's from, does that match what's actually shown? That is when they align the from sending domain matches the actual from address. So enter the domain-based message authentication, reporting, and conformance DMARC records, right? So the purpose of that was to allow them to handle, once you have that alignment determination, you can then tell the mail server how to handle those emails that are not authenticated using either or both of those other previous standards, SPF or DKIM. So basically the process is it adds that requirement of alignment. So it means that in order for the SPF or DKIM to be used to pass DMARC, that domain in either the return path in the case of SPF or the domain associated with that private key in DKIM are the actual same domain that the recipient sees in the from address. Okay, it's aligning those domains. And so the procedure is that those DMARC records are basically, again, published via DNS as a text record, and they're basically letting the servers know what they should do with non-aligned email received from your domain. So it basically dramatically improves both of those by letting you do several things. It lets you monitor and detect real-world problems with your SPF and DKIM configuration, right? Because it allows you to flag and to notify you that you failed SPF or you failed DKIM. Because it's basically, the other ones are just silent killers, right? If it doesn't match and it's out of your receiver's profile, it just goes to spam or doesn't get delivered. This one actually tells the system, if this fails and it goes to spam, like, tell me, like, what failed. It allows you to get those reports, and we'll get to that in a second as well. And then it allows you to see email volumes that are delivered into inboxes, right? It gives you some information. It allows you to identify threat emails pretending to come from your domain and spoofing, because you're going to get that notification. You're like, what? Was somebody, this domain is trying to send from me? And then you can kind of control that. And then you can also control the delivery of your email and defend against spoofing attacks as well. So you basically can say, like, don't even show people that email if it does not come from, if it comes from me, it's, you know, it's come from me. If not, if it fails any other stuff, go ahead and throw it in the trash. And you can kind of, and again, the services are starting to define what's happening with those DMARC failures as well. So in order to pass those DMARC authentications, a message must both pass and align for either SPF or DKIM. And then even if it passes authentication for both, it could still fail DMARC authentication if one of them does not align. And so that's again, because that's the added requirement of alignment. And so there's basically two ways to pass, you know, that validation. It's either, you know, by the DKIM or the SPF, or both, if that's what your system is set up as. So again, back to the visual for the DMARC policy. You get a sender's inbox who sends an email. And then it goes to the sending organization server, right, and sends out that email, and then somebody gets it. So now let's go to the vertical path here. It's going to check the sending organization's DMARC record, again, at your DNS records upon receipt, and pull that published DMARC record out of there. It's then going to make a decision, right? It's going to determine whether it passes or fails those SPF or other ones. It's going to compare it to the email in the from address. And then once it makes that determination, it's going to either pass or fail. It's going to send that report back on the bottom, like we talked about before. It's going to tell you, hey, it failed, or it passed, right? Or generally, it'll send you the ones that failed, so you can know what to do with it. And then besides the email report, it's going to do something at the email server, right? So let's just pretend this is Gmail. It's going to decide what to do with it. And again, this varies depending on your service. So it's going to do one of three things. It's going to reject it. If there's a reject policy on there, or you tell it to reject, it's going to fail the DMARC policy. It's basically dropped and not delivered at all. It's just going to say, no, go somewhere else. Or you can just allow it. On valid email, it's going to go straight to their inbox. So if it's valid, it's going to go there. And then there's a quarantine policy if it's set up in there, where it basically a failed DMARC policy, a message is basically sent to their spam or junk folder. So this is where you see Gmail, where stuff goes to your spam folders because it didn't pass DMARC, or there's not a DMARC record at all to check against. And so it basically goes into that quarantine and goes into your spam folder. So obviously the thing you want to do is have the DMARC policy there, have it pass, and then go straight to their inbox. And that's one thing that is not in Brilliant Directories that you can add to try to improve that. And we'll go over that in just a second. So here is an example of a DMARC record that I put into my BD DNS servers, and you can do the same. And again, this is just an example. Now the only difference in here that you would want to change is the mail to for the RUA and the RUF would be your email. Like, so if it's support@whatever.com, you don't want to send, you know, your failures to SendGrid. You want to send it to you so you can get that email. And again, you may not want to get the email, and you just kind of leave those mail twos out because you just don't really want to get a failure record. But we'll get into that in a second. But these are all the different DMARC record settings. Again, a lot of acronyms, a lot of letters here, a lot of technical stuff, right? But just in general, it breaks it down into several different types of tags. The policy tags, the alignment tags, the aggregate reporting tags, and then the failure reporting tags. So those are the emails that are getting sent out back for the failure. So let's go walking through these one by one here. So the V in there is the mandatory one. It has to have that on there. It's just a DMARC version. It's just the identifier it looks for. And then if you do not have a text record that begins with V equals DMARC 1, the receiving server will not run a DMARC check. So like it has to be in there like that. Otherwise, it's just always going to fail DMARC, and some stuff may go to spam when it shouldn't. So it has to have that mandatory, and it has to be exactly that, V equals DMARC 1. The P equals none is also mandatory, and this is basically the policy. So it's basically what you select in your own DMARC record that will tell the participating server to do with it if it fails the SPF or DKIM. So in that, that quarantine, pass, or reject thing, that's the side that we're talking about here. If you have P equals none, it basically is saying, hey, don't take any action other than sending the reports. And with that enabled, you'll get reports from organizations, including, Google, Yahoo, and Hotmail and stuff like that, basically to tell you something went wrong. You can also step these up in deliverability. So normally you would leave it as P equals none, and you would get the reports back and start seeing, oh crap, I didn't set up SPF from this, or hey, I didn't add that IP address, and I'll add it. And so now you'll stop getting the errors for that. You may get some errors for DKIM that you'll get back, and you're like, oh, they changed their private key, or I'd never set up a DKIM for that server, and let me go grab that and add it in there. And so you'll slowly start reducing the failure rates you get for those. And then once you start getting no reports back and it's all set and you got all your the services that you use in your DNS records, you can kind of step it up to the next level and change it to P equals quarantine. And once that compliance is high enough, you can direct your to mark any failed ones as spam. And so, but you're basically telling the world that your SPF and DKIM deployment is so accurate that and to be careful with any messages that fail, because you've knocked it out of the park with all your requirements. Like if it's coming from me and it doesn't say it's from me, then it's probably something's fishy there. It's not like I forgot to set it up properly or whatever. I did that, and so be very careful. Again, in general, I would probably just leave it as none for everybody if you're going to do this, because to be honest, like unless you're a huge company and you're like that concerned about, getting phishing emails or going to get sued because you're a bank and people lost money or whatever, like you probably don't need to necessarily step it up, but you can, right? And if you want that security from your people, like if it's coming from me, it's coming from me. Otherwise, it's not getting into your inbox. But again, it can be a totally legitimate email. And there's circumstances where you can't control it. And if you put a quarantine, you're stopping valid emails from getting through. So, for example, I have my email system that I use does not have DMARC capability, or DKIM capability. Excuse me. They just don't send it out with a DKIM header. And so, if yours is like that, you're never going to pass DMARC because your DKIM is not even there. Like it's just going to fail that every single time because it's just not there. But it's a legitimate email that you are sending from you. And so if you have any of those circumstances where you have something where the SPF or DKIM is going to fail, then don't ever put quarantine or reject, because it's going to block your actual emails that you are trying to send. So, and then the final one is, if you're sure that all your messages are passing DMARC, you can direct them to just outright reject them that fail. So you're basically telling them your deployment is fully complete, up to date. Just don't even show that it showed up. It basically just stops it at the door. And so nobody's like gonna, because everybody looks at their spam folder, right? I do, you do. What the reject does is it allows you to say it's not even in your spam folder. Like, you're not even gonna have an attempt or a way to do that spoofing thing or find out any stuff or do any nefarious actions on the other end coming from my domain, because it's not even getting there unless it validates everything. So that's kind of the ultimate, goal, I guess, for anybody, deliverability, just and to prevent any kind of fraudulent actions. But again, for the most part, I don't think anybody's doing big financial stuff or other things this is really a player, but it could be for you, and just want to have you know what that is, since we're trying to cover the topic in full. The next one is %100. So this is basically tells the receiving server how much of their email should be subjected to the DMARC specification. So you can choose a number between 1 and 100. P, if P was set to reject, basically, right? So and it was 100 of the mail that fails that would be rejected. Now you could do 50%, like, hey, let 50% of it into the spam, and then 100%. But then to me, it kind of defeats the purpose of having it set at reject. Why would you just be so confident in your system that you were, going to reject it, but then only reject 50%? That doesn't make any sense. SP is also optional. This is part that telling the serving receiver whether or not to apply the policy to subdomains. So if you, in general, you want the subdomains and subdomain, or the main domain and subdomains to be covered by the same policy. So this tag's not needed, but in case you have some subdomains that need a different policy than your main one, then you could, include that. Here's the reporting pieces, the RUA. This is basically that mail to address. It's optional but recommended. Again, it tells them where to send those reports of failures. And this can be any address you choose. It doesn't have to be from the sending email. So it's ironic that you could then not spoof, but I mean, it's from you, but you can add any other email. It doesn't have to be the sending email. So just keep that in mind. It could be a Hotmail account, even if you're using Gmail. But the thing I want to tell you guys on this one is it comes in XML format, and it's not easy to read unless you have an XML parser or a feed reader or whatever. So just be aware of that. It's not like in English. You have to parse out the data, and sometimes it's just an IP address that's coming back, and you kind of have to figure out what IP address it is that's sending it to go figure out where to fix. But it is helpful to know what's getting rejected or which email servers are not getting it, right? Which email ones are rejecting it. Because you may be having a problem with a particular destination and solve some deliverability issues or whatever. So just take it with a grain of salt, start getting them, and then you can always kind of do a filter, email filter, put all those reports into a particular email box. You don't have to go look at them, and they're not gunking up your normal inbox. In fact, that's what I would almost recommend, is that you set up a DMARC at yourdomain.com or whatever, and it kind of goes in that folder, and go look at them if you want. Otherwise, they just kind of accumulate in there and doesn't bung up your normal email inbox. The RI number is basically the number of seconds elapsed between sending reports. So it defaults to 86,400 seconds, which basically means once per day. So most of them, servers can't report sending more than once a day anyway, so there's no really need to change that value unless you want it to be sent a longer period of time. So and then this is what I just talked about their machine readable, right? Their XML records. So go to validmail.com to collect the reports if you want, or you can kind of see what that looks like. Failure reporting continued here. RFF or RF equals AFRF. It's also optional. It's basically the reporting format. But none of the major mailbox providers right now generate these reports anyway. So it doesn't really matter. There's only one format now anyway. Again, I think they build all these things out thinking people are going to build on or add in. It's kind of more like a framework for future use, but nobody really uses those now anyway, and there's only one format. So, and then the RUF is again optional. This is where they send the DMARC failures, and again, it can be this one. The email address must be from the domain that the record is published for. So keep that in mind. This one cannot be any random one. But because of the risk of PII exposure on this, in terms of the those DMARC things, none of the major mailbox providers generate those reports anymore, because it basically sends the other data in another email just to potentially have somebody grab that data out of that formatted email. And again, if you're spoofing stuff with that DMARC from somebody else, you can be getting some data that people are sending back. So nobody uses that anymore. So again, just more information. FO is optional. Basically, its failure reporting option specifies which failed messages will trigger a failure report. So by default, they're all the underlying authentication mechanism failures. So again, nobody actually uses this to generate the reports. It just generates them anyway. And it doesn't allow for that specificity of the triggers, again, just because it's only for big players normally, and they're not using it right now anyway. So if they're not using it, then you don't care about it potentially. DKIM equals R optional. Again, it sets the DKIM alignment, so it can either be set to strict or R for relaxed. And what that means is that it needs to exactly match the from domain. If it's more relaxed, it will pass it if it matches the root domain from the from address. So, for example, if it's forum.yourdomain.com, it would pass. If you have it strict and it came from forum.com or whatever, it would fail because it's not, it differentiates between the subdomain and the main domain. So normally you would want it relaxed because you own that domain, and this means you control the subdomains. So there's really no reason to have it not be relaxed. ASPF equals R is the SPF alignment, and it's the same thing only for SPF. So again, I'd recommend doing relaxed on both. So back to the original alignment passing. Again, just kind of go over this in a little bit more depth. If the SPF passes, it means that the message was delivered from the IP address, right? And also that it aligns, meaning that the from header also matches the authenticated SPF domain from the return senders. Okay. Or if you're doing DKIM alignment, it also means that DKIM passes, meaning that that message was correctly signed with those public and private keys, which we talked about before, and also that aligns, meaning that the from header is visible to the user, matches that D equals domain in the DKIM header. So again, the big picture line, the alignment piece added is checking the from address. So again, now going back to that alignment thing in more detail here for the DMARC, you're going to get that email from the mail server, get to the receiving server. It's then going to go to domain.com, obtain that return path address domain mail, which is the SPF, right? That return path one. It's then going to obtain the from address from the email domain from the email that you received, compare them, and if they match and the SPF is correct, then it is going to be SPF aligned. On the other half, it's going to obtain that DKIM signature from the email headers, do all of that DKIM stuff, and pass or fail the DKIM. It's also then going to obtain that from address. It's going to compare those two addresses and say if it's matching. If they are, and then the DKIM is also passed and correct, it's going to be DKIM aligned. And then obviously the one in the middle is if they do not match, right? Then the DMARC alignment is going to fail because it's either going to be the SPF is not aligned or the DKIM is not aligned, and so one of those two is going to cause an alignment failure, and the DMARC is going to fail. And then again, depending on what your settings are set, it may go into spam. So hopefully that explains the alignment piece. And so the SPF and the DKIM are just using those procedures we talked about in detail for those. They're comparing it in the DMARC to the from address and then passing or failing and aligning. So some DMARC tips as well. Only the DMARC one tag is case sensitive, so don't worry about the other stuff. That is the only one that has to be in all caps, and it has to be like that as we talked about earlier. The tags V and P must be set as the first and second position. If it is not, they will fail. It needs to be in that order, in that position. V equals and then P equals. All the other tags are optional and can be placed in any order, but those two are required and have to be in that order. The primary domain policies apply to subdomains unless a subdomain policy is explicitly defined. So again, I already told you that you do not have to add those in for subdomains. And I would, even if you do, I would make it relaxed so they pass. And then you can have, and this is red and bolded, one and only one DMARC text record on a domain or subdomain. Multiple records are treated as if there is no DMARC record at all. So this is just like SPF, that you cannot have multiple, because this is not specific to a sender or an IP address. It literally is just saying, I need you to check the from address and the SPF or DMARC, and then based on that alignment, do something, right? Pass, fail, reject, send me a text record. And so it doesn't really do anything, right? Other than the systems that are checking the email, like the Gmails, to know that you're actually asking for that to happen. And so if Google looks and goes and looks for your DMARC policy and does not see it, you're not going to pass DMARC, and it's not going to know that that from address is correct. It just doesn't do it automatically. So if it's not there, it's going to automatically fail that. And again, that could cause some email to go to spam because you don't have a DMARC record in your system in order to pass. So some of the limitations on this, it's hard to interpret high volumes of XML data dumps from the DMARC aggregate reports. I talked to you about that. You get it from Google, from Yahoo, from other people. They're sending those failure reports to your inbox, and it's in XML format. If you're getting a lot of them, it is very hard to extrapolate the data from those. And again, that's why I recommend maybe go into another email box so it doesn't mess up your normal one. The other thing I said, it comes in as an IP address, right? So especially the big companies that are have tons of stuff. They have to parse through thousands of IP addresses to figure out which one of those cloud platforms and third-party providers the IP address is mapped to, and then they got to fix it, right? So very complicated in execution. And then for those email sending services using an email service provider, guess which SaaS services are running on which ESP. Who knows, right? Like you're paying somebody, but they're actually using an Amazon email server. You didn't know that. You just know you're using a SaaS company. It's very hard unless you go through the support and kind of grill them on what their IP address, or try to figure it out. It can get complicated sometimes. So again, for the most part, you want to kind of hit the big ticket things that you can affect or find out and fix those first. And then you have to determine the business owners in your company, for each service, right? I mean, if you're a big company, again, for most people, this isn't a factor, but you may have some, you may not control or have access to all the domain names or all the records. And so you got to figure out where all the records are at for different things if you have multiple domains or whatever. You probably don't have the problem. I don't have that problem because you're a solopreneur or a small company and you own everything, but that is a limitation for some other companies. So here's how you set it up. You obviously first have to deploy DKIM and SPF with your sender authentication. Set those up because that is DMARC is using those items, and then you have to verify that that it's proper signing for all your allowed domains. So right, it has to pass all those in order to do anything. And then you have to publish that DMARC record with your DNS register or inside your cPanel in your BD site with the none flag set for the policies, and then monitor the results, right? You want to have it as none. You don't want to automatically reject or go to not even get delivered, because we talked about that. You kind of want to step it up, have that as P equals none first. So you just kind of get the error reports and it's checking. It lets it through based on the system, but you want to just get those emails to you. So here's my exact DMARC record I have on my directory toolkit website. V equals DMARC 1, P equals none, mail to for both that for the rough and the RUA. For me, I get those XML reports to my inbox. Again, I didn't tell you what I told you to do. I have it going to my inbox just for now, just so I can easily look at it while I'm trying to figure out how to set it up. And then you can always just go back and change the DMARC record later to like dmarc@directorytoolkit.com, and I'll probably do that a little bit later. And then you analyze the feedback you receive and then adjust your mail streams as needed. Redo your DKIM or SPF settings if something's failing. Maybe you put the wrong key in. Maybe it expired. Maybe you have multiple SPF records. You're like, what? I put that in there. Oh, crap, I have two. I need to consolidate down to one. And then, finally escalate your DMARC policy tags from none to quarantine and reject as you gain experience, and you don't stop getting any, failed emails on those RUAs and RUFs, error messages. So here's an example of a system where you can go check your deliverability. It's called mxtoolbox.com. There's the address right there. You guys can go look at. But what it basically does, you send an email to there, and it basically looks at your headers, looks at all your policies, and tells you what the issues are if there are any. So I sent this from the BD site, and this is what I get here from BD if you do not set up that DMARC compliant. If you don't have that DMARC record, it's going to say no DMARC record found. It's going to fail. Right, and you notice that the emails from your SendGrid and from your BD site, SPF Authenticate in green and DKIM Authenticate, because they've added those for you. What it does is it fails the alignment because I do not have that DMARC record found. There's no statement to say align it to the from. It doesn't know to do that. If I add the DMARC compliant thing, it would then go green for all of them and align because it is allowed for that comparison. Here's where some items will not pass, right? Even if you have a DKIM is authenticated, it may not pass because the actual domain in that setting is not from your actual domain. So for example, if I have a DMARC policy, on the left is one from another service where I set up a SendGrid account. They actually changed the from address, right, as my domain. So that's going to pass the DMARC compliance because you see all greens. This is, I think, from SendFox that I set up and sends things out. It sends from directorytoolkit.com, and I get all greens because it passes DMARC. It says DMARC, look for my from address is the same as the sending address, right? Here's the problem. One problem with BD. Now, hopefully they're going to fix it, but it does not pass on the DKIM alignment for BD because SendGrid with that shared account, and again, if you want your own domain and pay for it, you can fix that and change your own things in SendGrid, but it sends as SendGrid.net, like the from address. And so I'm sorry, from their domain, right? So it's an authenticated DKIM because they've got the public and private key are on your DNS; those match. It's SPF authenticated because it's sending it from a proper IP address, and you have that SendGrid all in your SP address. But it does not pass the DMARC compliance record because it sends as SendGrid instead of your own domain because it's a shared domain. It doesn't know all the hundreds of brand directories domains it's sending from. It's just sending from that shared SendGrid account. So those are never going to align. And so just inherently, there's going to be some rejected emails just based on that because they're not aligned, even if you have a statement. So just keep that in mind. I mean, the only way around that really is to pay for that SendGrid account on your own and have it so you can change it and send it from your own domain instead of that shared SendGrid account. And it just is what it is. I mean, it's nothing against BD on that. Is just using that text record process that they have. It's not going to do that. This is a paid service for SendFox, right? And this is using a CNAME record as opposed to a text record, just a different process, and they're able to do it. It's just you're paying for that monthly. They're just I think they could probably get there, but they're not charging you to set up all that extra stuff right now. And so the only way to get around that right now is to go get your own SendGrid account and change your domain. So just keep that in mind. Maybe something you want to, if you're worried about your deliverability, again, you can add that DMARC record in there, and it can solve a little bit, but not all of it. So here's an example from my Brilliant Directories item. Here, you see at the top here, there's a DKIM that's automatically added for you. And you see the SPF record down at the bottom, and that is automatically added in there for you as well. So this is automatically in your DNS records in the back end of your thing. So if you go to Developer and cPanel, and then you go in your cPanel and go into DNS, there's a DNS section, and you just click on that, and you open that up, and then you open up the SSL for your domain and manage that for your domain and get into the actual records. You'll just see that they're already in there. Again, you don't have to add those in there. If you want to add in your own DKIM for another server, you would have to go into your records, click Add Record, and add one of those. Here's some other just tidbits that some people don't know about. Again, going back to those different standards, those internet protocols or whatever, they actually call for mailbox providers for abuse to send them to postmaster at your domain and abuse at your domain. And so it states that, and again, because these are email servers that are doing that, these requirements state that the errors during processing of email should be directed to the postmaster email address. And then 2142 indicates that any abusive behavior, such as spamming, should be reported to the abuse email address. So some ISPs actually expect that you have these mailboxes set up. Deliverability partners will send emails to these addresses periodically to see if you respond, potentially, just to make sure that you're not a spammer. And then many organizations have mailboxes redirecting incoming emails to those addresses to another email box for monitoring. So you can always just forward those abuse and postmaster to your main one, but I would always recommend sending or setting up those email addresses inside of your cPanel or your MX records at your G Suite, wherever you're at. just to make sure that you have your bases covered on that. And then sometimes, again, this for spamming things, some anti-spam systems that these companies pay for, a number of them actually still check those addresses. So messages that the user sends can go to the spam folder of an anti-spam system if they don't find an active address postmaster at your domain. So some of your spam may be as simple as that. You just need to add the postmaster at your domain and not be flagged by some anti-spam systems. So go do that as well. So hope that was good for you guys. And I know there's probably more detail than most of you wanted, but it goes over the email deliverability, SPK, DKIM, and DMARC settings, what you can do, how to execute those to improve your email deliverability. As always, if you have any questions, let me know. And you can check this out on directorytoolkit.com and directoryvideos.com. Until next time, Ryan is out for directorywebinars.com. Thanks.